This is 27-year-old Marshall Jones and his mother, Alicia. Just feet away, concealed inside the trunk of their vehicle, lies the dismembered body of Marshall's girlfriend, 24-year-old Alexis Gabe. Over the next 4 months, a series of calculated lies and deliberate misdirection would bring Marshall face to face with local police and federal investigators, who would unknowingly walk past his murder scene multiple times before slowly uncovering the monster he truly is. This is the story of how one decision to end a relationship led to murder, family conspiracy, and a justice system that failed to hold everyone accountable. If cases like this captivate you, you're in the right place. Hit that like button and subscribe to the Dark Evidence Chronicles, where we uncover the truth behind the most disturbing criminal cases with meticulous research and compelling storytelling. Now, let's go back to where this nightmare began. January 26, 2022. It's approximately 6:30 in the evening in Antioch, California, when 24-year-old Alexis Gabe pulls into a Chevron gas station. Surveillance cameras capture her filling up her car, appearing calm, and going through the routine motions of an ordinary Wednesday evening. While standing at the pump, her phone illuminates with an incoming message. The text is from her boyfriend of nearly 4 years, Marshall Jones. It reads, "Are you still coming over?" Alexis types back quickly, "I can only come by for a bit today." She has no way of knowing that this simple exchange will be among her final communications with the outside world. After paying for her gas, Alexis gets back into her vehicle and merges onto the road. By 6:37 that evening, surveillance footage captures her car arriving at a single-story residence in Antioch. This is the home of Marshall's stepfather, where Marshall has been living. What Marshall doesn't know yet is that Alexis has come to break up with him. According to her family, their relationship had become increasingly toxic over the previous 18 months. Friends and relatives would later report that Marshall had made disturbing threats, claiming he would kill himself or Alexis if their relationship ever ended. These weren't empty words spoken in moments of passion. They were calculated warnings designed to keep Alexis tethered to him through fear. But on this particular evening, Alexis had made her decision. She was ending things, regardless of the consequences she anticipated. What she couldn't anticipate was just how far those consequences would extend. For the next 2 hours, the outside world has no visual confirmation of what transpired inside that house. Marshall would later tell police that Alexis came inside. They embraced, kissed, and spent time together watching him play Grand Theft Auto on his gaming console. He claimed they watched episodes of Family Guy together. He painted a picture of a normal, relaxed evening between a couple in a long-term relationship. But something happened during those 2 hours. Something that Marshall would spend the next 4 months desperately trying to conceal. At approximately 8:30 that evening, Alexis's vehicle is captured on surveillance cameras leaving Marshall's residence. But immediately, something appears wrong. The car takes an unusual route, one that Alexis has never been known to use when traveling home. Her family, who knew her habits and patterns intimately, would later confirm that this route made no sense for someone heading to her residence. 12 minutes after leaving Marshall's house, roughly 6 miles away, the vehicle pulls into a quiet residential neighborhood. The car comes to a stop. The driver's side door opens. A masked figure emerges from the vehicle. Surveillance footage is clear enough to reveal crucial details. This person is noticeably larger than Alexis, with a build and stature that appears distinctly masculine. The figure's movements are deliberate, not panicked. This is someone executing a plan, not fleeing in chaos. The keys are left in the ignition. The door is left unlocked. Personal items that Alexis would never willingly abandon are missing from the vehicle. Moments after the masked figure disappears from view, Alexis's phone receives an incoming text message. "Did you make it home?" The message is from Marshall. Think about the implications of that text message. Marshall is asking if Alexis made it home safely, sent at the exact time a masked figure is abandoning her vehicle miles away from her actual home. This wasn't a concerned boyfriend checking on his partner. This was someone establishing an alibi, creating a digital record that would suggest normalcy and care. From this moment forward, Alexis Gabe is never seen or heard from again. The following morning, January 27th, Alexis's family begins to panic. Phone calls go unanswered. Text messages deliver but receive no response. By late morning, her sister can no longer contain her fear and dials the sheriff's department. The call is urgent from the very first word. Alexis's sister identifies herself and immediately requests to file a missing person report. The dispatch operator asks standard questions about when Alexis was last seen, where she might have gone, whether this is normal behavior. The sister's responses make clear that this is anything but normal. No one in the family has heard from Alexis since she went to visit her ex-boyfriend the previous evening around 8:30. Her phone is now going straight to voicemail, which is completely out of character. Alexis is someone who stays in constant communication with her family. Understanding the urgency in the caller's voice, dispatch sends Officer Rod County to the family's residence to gather more detailed information. What he learns during this initial interview immediately elevates the case from a routine missing person report to something far more sinister. Alexis's mother is present for the interview, and her concern is palpable. Officer County asks the standard questions designed to rule out voluntary disappearance. Has Alexis ever made suicidal statements? Is she generally happy? Does she have mental health issues that might explain sudden disappearance? The mother's answers paint a picture of a vibrant young woman with strong family connections, an active social life, and no history suggesting she would vanish voluntarily. But then the conversation turns to Marshall Jones, and the temperature in the room shifts. According to Alexis's mother, Marshall is the boyfriend Alexis went to see the previous evening. But the detail that makes Officer County's attention sharpen is what comes next. The mother reveals that just the day before, a friend informed the family that Marshall had explicitly threatened Alexis. If they broke up, Marshall said, he would kill himself or he would kill Alexis. Officer County now has a name, a last known location, and an alleged threat. He knows exactly who needs to be contacted next. After completing his initial assessment and search of the area, he relays all information to his sergeant. Requests are immediately made for street surveillance footage from cameras along routes Alexis might have traveled. A warrant for real-time location data from her phone is prioritized. Most urgently, another officer is dispatched directly to Marshall's address. Later that same afternoon, an officer arrives at the residence knowing that Marshall is one of the last people to see Alexis alive. The expectation is to gather basic information about her whereabouts, to establish a timeline, to determine if Marshall has any knowledge that might help locate her. What the officer is about to encounter will be far more revealing than simple information gathering. Marshall answers the door alongside his mother. The officer explains the situation. Alexis's family has reported her missing, and since Marshall saw her last, police need to ask some questions. Marshall's reaction is immediate cooperation, but his demeanor is strangely detached. For someone whose girlfriend of nearly 4 years has just been reported missing, his emotional response seems muted, almost rehearsed. At certain points during the conversation, he even attempts to inject humor into the situation, making light comments that seem jarringly inappropriate given the circumstances. The officer asks when Marshall last saw or spoke with Alexis. Marshall pauses, then says he needs to check his phone for exact times. He pulls up their text message thread and explains that he talked to her throughout the day on January 26th. He states that at 6:38, she told him she was outside his house. He let her in. They hung out for a couple of hours. She left around 9 o'clock. The officer asks where Alexis said she was going. Marshall claims he needs to show the text messages to explain properly. He presents his phone, scrolling through messages, pointing out that he's been trying to contact her since her disappearance, but his messages aren't delivering and his calls go straight to voicemail. When asked if he has any idea where Alexis might be, Marshall responds with a phrase that will be analyzed extensively in the coming weeks. "Brother, I'm going to keep it a buck with you. I honestly thought she went to go smoke with her friend Rhea when she left here." He explains that Alexis wouldn't typically tell him what she was doing until she was already doing it. So when she left his house, he assumed she went to smoke marijuana with her friend Maria, who goes by Rhea. But when he kept calling by 11 o'clock that night and got no response, he claims he became concerned. The officer asks if Alexis seemed out of sorts when she visited. Was she acting like her normal self? Marshall insists everything was completely normal. She came in, they hugged, they kissed, she watched him play his video game, they watched television together. It was fine, he says. Just a regular evening. When asked if he saw her leave, Marshall confirms that yes, he saw her leave because he opened the garage door for her as she departed. At first assessment, Marshall appears far more cooperative than Alexis's family suggested he might be. But his emotional detachment is notable. This is someone describing a normal evening with his girlfriend who has now vanished, yet his effect is flat. His concern seems performative rather than genuine. Before concluding the interview, the officer asks one of the strangest questions imaginable in this context. "You ain't got her strapped down in the house like a slave or nothing?" It's phrased as an attempt at breaking tension with dark humor, but the question itself reveals that even in this initial contact, the officer harbors suspicions about Marshall's potential involvement. Marshall responds appropriately, acknowledging it's a serious situation while denying any such thing. The interview concludes, and the officer contacts his sergeant to report the interaction. But while this conversation was taking place, a major development was unfolding just miles away. Alexis's family, unable to simply wait for police procedures to run their course, had organized their own search. They created and distributed flyers. They canvassed neighborhoods. They posted on social media, asking anyone with information to come forward. And during this grassroots search, they found Alexis's car. The vehicle is located on a residential street in Antioch, parked in a manner that immediately strikes the family as wrong. Police are notified immediately, and the car is secured, towed, and seized for comprehensive forensic analysis. The initial examination reveals deeply troubling details. The keys are still in the ignition. The door is unlocked. Personal items that Alexis carried with her daily are missing. There are no signs of struggle inside the vehicle, but there are also no signs that Alexis was the last person to drive it. Forensic technicians remove the car's infotainment system and extract its data. Modern vehicles record extensive information about routes traveled, destinations entered, and precise timestamps. The data tells a clear story. 12 minutes before the car was abandoned in that residential neighborhood, it had been at Marshall's house. Not at her friend Maria's residence, as Marshall suggested. Not on some unknown route to an unfamiliar location. The car went from Marshall's house directly to the abandonment site. Combined with the alleged death threats and the timeline inconsistencies, this evidence elevates Marshall from a person of interest to the primary suspect in Alexis's disappearance. The following day, January 28th, two detectives arrive at Marshall's residence. They're operating under the theory that he was the last person to see Alexis alive and has been withholding critical information. But they're also there for something else, something they believe will catch Marshall completely off guard. Marshall answers the door, and the detectives identify themselves. They explain they're still searching for Alexis and ask if he's heard from her at all. Marshall's response mirrors his previous statements. He has not heard from her. He's been trying to call and text, but messages aren't delivering and calls go straight to voicemail. The detectives acknowledge that this is the last place they know Alexis was located, which is why they're focusing their investigation on this area. Marshall says he understands. But then he adds something revealing. He mentions that Alexis's friends have been, as he puts it, putting him under scrutiny, making him feel like he did something wrong when he insists he didn't. One detective responds that this is natural. Anytime there's a boyfriend and a missing girlfriend, scrutiny follows. It's just part of the process of ruling things out, so they can move their search elsewhere. Then comes the request that will determine how this interaction unfolds. The detective asks if Marshall is okay with them going inside to look around quickly. Marshall's entire demeanor shifts. He becomes visibly uncomfortable. He explains that it's not his house, it's his stepfather's house, so he can't just give permission. The detective suggests he call his stepfather to get approval. Marshall agrees and makes the call. After a brief conversation, he relays his stepfather's response. One officer can enter. The other must remain outside. This is an unusual restriction, and it immediately heightens the detective's suspicions. Why would the homeowner, whose stepson's girlfriend is missing, place restrictions on police trying to locate her? What is inside that house that they don't want fully examined? One detective agrees to the terms and enters with Marshall while the other waits outside. As Marshall leads the detective through the residence, his bedroom quickly stands out. It's in complete disarray, with clothes scattered, bottles visible, and general disorder that Marshall immediately apologizes for. The detective reassures him that mess happens and continues the examination. Marshall mentions that some of Alexis's clothes might be in his room from previous visits. The detective notes this, but finds nothing immediately concerning. As they move through the house, Marshall carefully guides the route. He points out what certain rooms are, mentions what areas belong to other people in the house, and subtly steers the detective away from certain spaces. The detective asks about an upstairs. Marshall confirms it's just a single-story house. The detective asks about the backyard. Marshall asks if he wants to see it, and the detective declines. Here's what the detective misses. In the hallway, there's access to an attic space. It's noted but not thoroughly examined. The detective's assessment, recorded on his body cam, is that nothing appears out of the ordinary. Marshall's room is messy, but that's not unusual for a young man living in his stepfather's house. What the detective doesn't know, what he has no way of knowing in this moment, is that this very house, possibly this very attic space, may be concealing evidence of a horrific crime. Marshall has successfully navigated law enforcement through his residence, allowing limited access while preventing discovery of what he's hiding. But the detectives aren't finished with Marshall yet. Outside, they make another request. Would Marshall be willing to provide his cell phone for a forensic download? Marshall asks what a forensic download entails. The detective explains it shows all information on the phone for a certain period, including location data that can confirm whether the phone was where Marshall claims he was during specific times. Marshall agrees. The detective explains he would need to come to the police station, sign a consent form, and provide his passcode so the download can be performed. Marshall consents to this as well. Interestingly, during this exchange, detectives also learned that Marshall's stepfather was allegedly at the house at the same time Alexis was there on the evening of January 26th. This is significant. If the stepfather was home, he would be a witness to Alexis's presence, her demeanor, and the time she left. His account could either corroborate or contradict Marshall's version of events. Detectives make a note to interview the stepfather as soon as possible. Shortly afterward, Marshall gets into his stepfather's vehicle and follows the police officers to the station. As he drives, the officers ahead notice something concerning. Marshall appears anxious. His driving is slightly erratic with moments of swerving, and there's something large in the back of the vehicle obstructing his rear view. What the officers don't know is that Marshall isn't just nervous about the phone download. He's just realized he's driving to a police station with a vehicle that may contain incriminating evidence. Approximately 10 minutes later, Marshall arrives at the station. He exits the vehicle trying to appear calm, but internally he's questioning every decision that led him to bring this particular car. The second he steps out, he realizes the officers are interested in more than just his phone. One detective casually asks what Marshall has in the back of the vehicle. Marshall responds that it's blankets and similar items. The detective asks if he can lift the gate to see inside. Marshall immediately becomes defensive. He reiterates that this isn't his car, it's his father's car, and police already have his phone. So does the detective really need to search the vehicle? The detective calmly explains he just wants to look inside, not conduct a full search. Marshall reluctantly agrees to open the gate so the detective can look, but his body language screams discomfort. Inside the cargo area, the detective finds multiple blankets, pillows, and food waste. Marshall quickly explains that he and Alexis went to a drive-in movie, and they used the back of the vehicle as a bed. He points to a bag containing what he identifies as Alexis's Philly cheesesteak from their drive-in date. The detective asks if any of these items belong to Alexis, explaining that they'd like to collect a DNA sample for reference. Marshall claims he doesn't know which items might be hers. When the detective asks permission to take one of the blankets for testing, Marshall refuses. He reiterates that it's his father's car and his father's property. The detective asks if Alexis normally sat in the front seat when riding in this vehicle. Marshall confirms she did. Then Marshall makes a statement that reveals just how aware he is of how this looks. I don't want you to think I have a dead body or anything in here. It's a bizarre thing to say, ostensibly meant as humor to deflect tension, but it's the kind of statement that, in retrospect, carries chilling undertones. The detectives note Marshall's extreme reluctance to allow examination of the trunk contents. Combined with the suspicious items and his defensive posture, red flags are mounting. However, without probable cause for a full search or seizure, they're limited in what they can do at this moment. Marshall signs the consent form for the phone download. The technician takes his device, records his passcode, and begins the data extraction process. Once completed, the phone is returned to Marshall, and he's allowed to leave. As Marshall drives away, detectives believe they've secured the evidence they need. Modern smartphone forensics can reveal location history, deleted messages, search history, an app usage that might expose what Marshall is hiding. They have no idea they're about to encounter a devastating setback. The next day, as investigators prepare to analyze the data extracted from Marshall's phone, they discover the download has failed. Technical errors during the process have left them with nothing usable. Not a single piece of data was successfully retrieved. This is a catastrophic loss. Modern investigations rely heavily on digital forensics, and a suspect's phone often contains the most damning evidence. Text messages, location data, internet searches, deleted files, all of it can paint a comprehensive picture of someone's actions and intentions. Now, all of that potential evidence is gone. Investigators face a difficult decision. They could approach Marshall again and request another download, but his willingness to cooperate has already shown signs of reaching its limits. If they push too hard too fast, he might lawyer up entirely, shutting down all voluntary cooperation. The decision is made to pull back temporarily and pursue other investigative avenues. There's still one crucial person they haven't interviewed yet. Marshall's stepfather, the homeowner who was allegedly inside the residence the same night Alexis disappeared. If something violent happened to Alexis that evening, there's a possibility the stepfather witnessed it, heard it, or at minimum noticed something unusual. Detectives returned to the house on January 29th to speak with Leslie, Marshall's stepfather. The conversation that follows will only deepen the mystery. The detectives greet Leslie and explain they're following up on everything related to Alexis's disappearance. They note that Marshall claimed Leslie was home on the evening of January 26th when Alexis visited. They asked directly, "Did you see Alexis here that night?" Leslie's response is immediate and unequivocal. He did not see her. He doesn't recall seeing her vehicle either. The detectives press slightly. He doesn't remember talking to her that night. Leslie confirms. He didn't see her there that night. This directly contradicts what Marshall told investigators. Marshall specifically mentioned that his stepfather was home during Alexis's visit, which would provide a witness to corroborate his version of events. Now the stepfather is claiming he never saw her at all. There are several possible explanations for this contradiction. Leslie could be lying to protect Marshall. Marshall could have lied about Leslie being home, meaning there was no witness to Alexis being there alive. Or Leslie genuinely might not have seen her if she was already dead before he arrived home. The detectives shift to more general questions. How is Marshall holding up with all this? Leslie describes Marshall as upset, which would be expected for someone whose girlfriend has gone missing. He mentions that he himself only found out about Alexis's disappearance the previous day when he saw a missing person flyer. His reaction, he claims, was shock. What the hell is going on? The detectives ask what Alexis was like as a person. Leslie describes her as good, an everyday person, a good young lady. When asked if she ever brought drama to the house, Leslie admits there was couple drama, like any relationship, but nothing out of the ordinary that he claims Marshall and Alexis never argued in front of him. Then the detectives ask if Marshall is around. One of the investigators has been trying to reach him without success. Leslie says Marshall isn't there. He mentions that Marshall told him he was going to talk to his mother. This gives police their next location to search, Marshall's mother's house. But what deeply concerns the investigators is Leslie's refusal to confirm being present when Alexis was allegedly at the house. This isn't a minor detail. It's a fundamental contradiction that suggests someone is lying, and that lie might be concealing something far darker than a simple misunderstanding. With more questions than answers, the officers leave to determine their next approach. From this point forward, the investigation quietly begins to shift. What started as a missing person case is increasingly being treated as a potential homicide. During the next several days, police make multiple visits to the home of Alicia Clark, Marshall's mother. Each time they ask if she's seen her son. Each time she claims she hasn't seen Marshall since the night of January 26th, the very night Alexis vanished. Her consistency is suspicious. Most mothers would be forthcoming about their son's whereabouts when his girlfriend is missing and police are seeking his cooperation. The repeated denials begin to paint a different picture. Investigators start to consider that Marshall may be on the run, and his family may be actively covering for him. But the biggest piece of evidence is still coming. Investigators have been working to obtain surveillance footage from cameras along the route Alexis's car traveled on the night of January 26th. This is often a time-consuming process requiring warrants, cooperation from multiple property owners, and technical work to compile footage from different systems. When the footage finally comes through, it confirms what investigators suspected and reveals something even more disturbing. The compiled surveillance shows Alexis's vehicle traveling the 12-minute route from Marshall's home to the residential area where it was abandoned. The car's speed and movement patterns are analyzed. It's being driven deliberately, not erratically, suggesting whoever is behind the wheel knows exactly where they're going. Then comes the moment of abandonment. The driver's door opens. A figure emerges. The person is wearing a mask, making facial identification impossible. But body proportions and movement patterns are distinctly masculine. The figure is notably larger than Alexis, with a broader build and different gait. Detectives begin tracking this figure's movements through additional surveillance cameras in the surrounding area. The masked person walks calmly, not running or appearing panicked. This is someone executing a planned route, not fleeing in desperation. The figure is tracked for over a mile as it moves through the neighborhood. And then the cameras reveal where this person's journey ends. The masked figure arrives at a specific address. Detectives cross-reference the location. It's Alicia Clark's house, Marshall's mother's residence. This development transforms the entire investigation. The masked figure who abandoned Alexis's car walked directly to Marshall's mother's home. Combined with Alicia's repeated claims that she hasn't seen Marshall since January 26th, this evidence suggests she's been lying to police from the very beginning. Investigators are now certain the masked figure was Marshall. And if Marshall walked to his mother's house after abandoning Alexis's vehicle, it means his mother almost certainly knew what had happened that night. With this evidence, an emergency search warrant for Marshall's residence is secured. On February 1st, more than a dozen officers arrive at the single-story home with a battering ram and full tactical preparation. They're convinced there is far more inside this house than Marshall showed them during the limited search weeks earlier. Officers announce their presence loudly. Oakley PD, search warrant. Open up. There's no response. Break the door. The forced entry is swift. Officers flood into the residence, weapons drawn, announcing themselves continuously. Oakley PD, come out with your hands up. Search warrant. As officers move methodically through each room, it becomes immediately apparent that neither Marshall nor his stepfather are present. The house is empty of occupants. But as officers begin their systematic search, starting with the main living areas and moving toward the garage and laundry room, something stops them in their tracks. It's a smell. Multiple officers detect it simultaneously, and their reactions are captured on bodycam footage. Smell it. Smells like dead body. Yep. The odor appears to be emanating from the laundry room area. Officers who have worked death investigations recognize this particular smell. It's distinct, unmistakable, and it indicates decomposition. One officer traces the scent, trying to identify its source. I can smell it coming from this way. Right here. I got a big whiff. The smell seems to be drifting from the laundry room upward, toward the attic access point. This is the same attic that was noted but not thoroughly searched during the previous visit. Officers prepare to investigate the attic space. They position ladders, prepare flashlights, and steel themselves for what they might find. As one officer climbs into the attic, others wait below, body cams recording every moment. The officer examines the space carefully. The insulation appears largely undisturbed, though there are pathways where someone has clearly walked before, likely for electrical work or maintenance. Do we agree it looks undisturbed? One officer asks. Another responds that it looks like it's been opened before, pointing to areas where the access panel has clearly been moved. The officer in the attic continues searching, looking for any signs of recent disturbance, drag marks, or areas where something might have been concealed. Did anybody check inside that SUV in the garage? Someone asks below. I didn't see anything. It's locked. As the attic search continues, officers notice something on the floor near the laundry area. Dark strands that appear to be hair. Black hair. Someone points to what might be blood spatter on a wall, though it could also be paint. The line between evidence and ordinary household marks is difficult to determine without proper testing. After thoroughly examining the attic space, the officer climbing through reports that while there are pathways where people have walked for electrical or maintenance work, there are no obvious footprints, no drag marks, and no visible signs that a body has been stored there recently. But the smell persists. Multiple officers confirm it. The scent of death is present in this house. Smells like blood and hair. One officer comments. The decision is made to clear out temporarily and bring an AK-9 unit specifically trained in human remains detection. If there's a body or body parts hidden somewhere in this residence, the dog represents their best chance of locating it. While waiting for the K-9, officers continue documenting the scene. They photograph the black hair. They mark areas where possible blood is present. They note the locations where the smell is strongest. When the K-9 handler arrives with the cadaver dog, officers brief them on what they've detected and where the smell seems concentrated. The dog is brought into the residence and begins its systematic search. Handlers watch the animal's behavior carefully. Trained cadaver dogs exhibit specific alerts when they detect human remains, changes in breathing, focused attention on particular areas, sitting or pawing at specific spots, and attempting to get closer to the source of the scent. The dog moves through the laundry room, where officers first detected the smell. Its behavior changes slightly, showing interest, but the handler notes this isn't a full alert. The dog is led through Marshall's bedroom. Again, there's interest. The animal returns to certain spots multiple times, sits in specific locations while staring at the handler, and at one point begins clawing at the wall. The wall-clawing behavior is particularly significant. It suggests the scent the dog is detecting is coming from behind or above that wall, possibly from the attic space on the other side. But despite these indicators, the handler isn't fully convinced the dog has definitively alerted to human remains. The behaviors are suggestive but not conclusive. Additional K-9 units are brought in. Multiple dogs are cycled through the residence, each conducting independent searches. The results are frustratingly similar, indicators of something, but nothing definitive enough to pinpoint a specific location. Officers expand their search, examining every corner of the property. In the garage, they find cleaning supplies including bleach. In the bathroom, they notice the shower curtain is missing, which seems odd but not necessarily incriminating on its own. Forensic techs collect samples of what appears to be blood for testing. They photograph everything that might be relevant. They document the entire scene with meticulous detail. But at the end of this extensive search, investigators are left with troubling evidence that doesn't quite reach the threshold of confirmation. They have small traces of what might be blood, the presence of bleach and cleaning supplies, a missing shower curtain, black hair that could belong to Alexis, a persistent smell that multiple officers identify as decomposition, K-9 behaviors suggesting human remains, but not definitively confirming them. The house is secured as a potential crime scene. Police seal it and begin working on obtaining real-time location data from Marshall's phone. They're now operating under the full assumption that they're investigating a homicide, even without a body. Over the next several weeks, Marshall seems to have vanished. His mother continues to claim ignorance of his whereabouts. His stepfather has stopped cooperating entirely. The investigation appears to be losing momentum. But every time law enforcement seems ready to shift resources elsewhere, Alexis Gabe's family refuses to let the case fade. They organize searches. They hold press conferences. They flood social media with Alexis's picture and information about her disappearance. They pressure police relentlessly to find their daughter and bring her justice. That pressure begins to pay off when investigators finally obtain a real-time location warrant from Marshall's phone. The data reveals he's moved to Vacaville, California, roughly 90 minutes from Antioch. A deeper check reveals exactly where that location leads, his sister's house. Detectives immediately head to the address, hoping to find Marshall there and finally bring him in for formal questioning. When they arrive and speak with his sister, Ariana, they encounter someone completely different from the rest of Marshall's family. Ariana is cooperative from the first moment. She acknowledges knowing why police are there, and what she tells them provides the clearest picture yet of who Marshall really is. She explains that when Marshall first arrived at her house, everything seemed fine. But then she saw the missing person flyer for Alexis circulating online. That's when she started putting the pieces together. Her reaction was immediate. She told Marshall he had to leave. She wanted nothing to do with whatever he'd done. When detectives ask about Marshall and Alexis's relationship, Ariana describes it as having become toxic over the last year and a half. But then she offers an observation that cuts to the heart of Marshall's psychology. He was a lot more torn up about them breaking up than about her being missing. I will say that irrefutably. Think about what that statement reveals. Marshall's emotional distress wasn't centered on Alexis's safety or well-being. It was centered on the loss of the relationship, the loss of control, the loss of possession. Ariana goes further, providing a clinical assessment of her own brother. Looking back on it, my brother does have sociopathic and narcissistic tendencies about himself. Detectives ask about their mother. Are Marshall and Alicia close? Ariana confirms they are. Then the detectives pose the question directly. Do you think your mother has helped Marshall in any way? Ariana hesitates, asking if her mother will get in trouble. The detective explains that ultimately, Marshall made his own choices, and they hope Alicia will eventually be as cooperative as Ariana is being. What Ariana provides next becomes one of the most valuable pieces of evidence in the ongoing manhunt. She has Marshall's new phone number. She hands it over to detectives without hesitation. As the interview concludes, Ariana also shares her belief that Marshall might be in Las Vegas, though she's not certain. What she is certain of is that someone in the family is helping him stay hidden. With the new phone number, investigators immediately begin tracking Marshall's location. The technology works remarkably quickly. Marshall's phone is pinging back in Antioch. Specifically, it's showing a location at Alicia Clark's house. For weeks, Alicia has been telling police she doesn't know where Marshall is, hasn't seen him, can't help them locate him. Now, electronic evidence proves Marshall's phone is at her residence. She's not just passively unhelpful. She's actively hiding a murder suspect. Over the next few hours, police work frantically to secure an emergency search warrant for Alicia's residence. Every moment of delay risks Marshall disappearing again, potentially fleeing to another state or going so deep underground that he becomes nearly impossible to find. The warrant is granted. Officers mobilize immediately, racing to Alicia's address. This time, they're not coming to ask questions. They're coming to search every inch of that property and detain anyone who's been obstructing their investigation. But what officers don't know is that the lead they're following is actually a setup. Marshall isn't at his mother's house. He's left his phone there deliberately, knowing police would track it, knowing they would waste time and resources raiding a location where he's not present. When officers arrive and execute the warrant, they find only Alicia and her daughter at home. Marshall is nowhere on the property. The frustration is immense. Marshall has been playing a calculated game, staying one move ahead of law enforcement by using his family as accomplices and his phone as a decoy. But officers do spot something valuable, a working security camera system outside Alicia's home. If that camera was recording during the time period after Alexis's disappearance, it might show exactly what Marshall and his mother were doing. A warrant for that footage becomes an immediate priority. Despite Marshall's absence, the forensics team confirms his phone is indeed inside the house, actively pinging. Officers locate it upstairs in Alicia's closet, hidden inside a green Hawaiian shirt. This discovery confirms what investigators have suspected for weeks. Alicia Clark isn't a mother in denial about her son's potential involvement. She's an active participant in helping him evade justice. Detectives decide to interview her on-site, both to gather any information she might provide and to assess her demeanor and responses. Alicia is escorted outside, and the questioning begins. Her demeanor is remarkably calm, almost cordial, as if police executing a search warrant on her home is a minor inconvenience rather than a serious criminal matter. Detectives ask about the phone. Where is it? Alicia readily admits it's upstairs in her closet, inside the green Hawaiian shirt. She shows no hesitation in revealing this, which itself is strange. She's admitting to possessing the phone of a wanted suspect, yet treats it as casual. When asked why police need the phone since they already cloned it previously, the detective explains that the previous download failed, so they need the physical device. Plus, Marshall has used the phone since that failed attempt, meaning it potentially contains new evidence. Then comes the critical question, where's Marshall? Alicia's response is carefully crafted. I do not know. The detective presses, you don't know? I do not know. I have intentionally told him, do not tell me where, for just this situation. I don't want to know. She's attempting to frame her ignorance as protective, not for Marshall, but for herself. By not knowing his location, she can claim she's not actively hiding him. The detective asks if she's distancing herself from her son. Alicia becomes almost indignant. Oh God, no. Not at all. I just know this isn't who we are. She insists she's definitely not distancing herself from Marshall. She just doesn't want to know where he is for legal reasons. The detective pivots, asking what she knows about the situation. Alicia begins describing Marshall and Alexis's relationship in glowing terms. She talks about how for Valentine's Day, Marshall couldn't afford an edible arrangement, so he bought all the components and built one himself. That's the kind of guy he is, she says proudly. This description is jarring. Alicia is painting her son as a thoughtful, romantic partner, while investigators are treating him as a murder suspect whose girlfriend's body hasn't been found. If Alicia knows what Marshall did, if she helped him dispose of evidence, then this performance is not just deceptive, it's sociopathic. Most mothers, even those in denial, would show some crack in their composure when defending a son accused of murder. Alicia shows none. The detective tries a different approach, appealing to emotion. They're still looking for Alexis, he says. She's still out there somewhere. Things don't look good. It's hard to look her family in the face and tell them police have nothing. Alicia listens, but doesn't waver. Then the detective asks something that reveals just how far from reality Alicia has drifted, or how committed she is to deflecting. Have you guys thought about maybe she was human trafficked? The detective's response is patient but firm. Some people have posted that theory on the internet, but most people don't have a good grasp on how human trafficking actually works. You can't just snatch up a 24-year-old, 170-pound woman without evidence of struggle or witnesses. Then comes the direct question that determines everything. Do you think Marshall had anything to do with it? Alicia's response is immediate and absolute. God, no. 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 The detective pushes. Even if there's evidence that would suggest he has something to do with it, Alicia's answer reveals everything about her mindset. You guys would have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. She's not saying Marshall didn't do it. She's saying police will have to prove it. It's the response of someone who knows the truth and is betting that without a body, without a confession, without irrefutable physical evidence, the case can't move forward. The detective tries one more approach, hinting that there's evidence they can't discuss, that agencies including the district attorney's office have been working this case for 3 months, examining every possibility. But Alicia doesn't budge. She maintains her position. Marshall is innocent. She doesn't know where he is, and police will have to prove their case. Officers inside successfully locate and seize Marshall's phone. Technicians immediately begin attempting another forensic download, hoping this time the process will succeed and reveal Marshall's movements, communications, and searches. But when the data extraction is reviewed, investigators face another devastating setback. The phone has been completely wiped. Every message, every photo, every piece of location history, all of it has been deleted. The phone is a blank slate, containing nothing that can help the investigation. Someone with technical knowledge cleaned this device thoroughly. Whether it was Marshall before leaving it or Alicia after he left, the result is the same. Critical evidence is gone. With no body, no confession, no physical evidence strong enough to charge anyone, and now no phone data. The investigation into Alexis's disappearance begins to go cold. Weeks turn into months. Marshall remains missing. His family remains uncooperative. Alexis's family grows increasingly frustrated with the pace of the investigation and the lack of charges against obvious accomplices. But then, finally, investigators secure the warrant they've been pursuing for months: access to the security camera footage from Alicia Clark's residence. Before we continue with what that footage revealed, if you're finding this investigation as compelling and disturbing as we are, make sure you're subscribed to the Dark Evidence Chronicles and hit that like button. We bring you the deepest research and most detailed analysis of true crime cases that deserve your attention. Now, let's see what those cameras captured. The security footage from Alicia Clark's residence becomes one of the most damning pieces of evidence in the entire investigation. When detectives finally review the files, they see exactly what happened in the hours and days after Alexis Gabe's murder. The footage shows Marshall and his mother, Alicia, loading large plastic bags into the trunk of a vehicle. The bags are heavy, requiring effort to lift and maneuver. The way they're handled, the size and shape, the careful placement into the cargo area, all of it is consistent with body disposal. Investigators believe those bags contained Alexis's dismembered remains. This is no longer a case of a mother in denial, passively refusing to believe her son capable of violence. This is active participation in concealing a homicide. This is evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and potentially accessory after the fact to murder. With this footage, combined with all the accumulated evidence pointing to Marshall's guilt, prosecutors are confident they can secure a murder warrant even without Alexis's body. But first, they need to find Marshall. Investigators reach back out to Ariana, Marshall's sister, who has become their most reliable source of information about his movements and connections. She mentions that Marshall has a friend at an apartment complex in Kent, Washington, and there's reason to believe he might be hiding there. Detectives begin cross-referencing this information with other intelligence. They examine travel records, looking for any indication Marshall or his associates traveled to Washington state. They review CCTV footage from highways and transit stations. They follow up on anonymous tips that have been called in to various hotlines. Multiple threads of evidence begin pointing to the same location, Skyview 3322 Apartments in Kent, Washington. A task force is assembled. This isn't just local police anymore. The FBI has become involved given the interstate nature of Marshall's flight. Resources are pooled, surveillance is established, and a plan is formulated. On June 1, 2022, more than 4 months after Alexis Gabe disappeared, the task force moves in to serve an arrest warrant for murder. Officers surround the apartment complex. Tactical teams position themselves at all possible exit points. Negotiators prepare to make contact. The goal is to take Marshall into custody without incident, to finally bring him in to face questioning and charges for what he did to Alexis. As officers approach the specific apartment unit where Marshall is believed to be staying, they announce their presence loudly and clearly. Police, open the door. There's no immediate response. Door is locked. Officers repeat the command. Open the door and do it now. Do it now. Still no response. The decision is made to breach. We're done. You are under arrest. Open the door and do it now. As officers prepare to force entry, movement is detected inside the apartment. The door begins to open. What happens next unfolds in seconds, captured on multiple bodycam angles. Marshall emerges from the apartment. In his hand is a kitchen knife. Officers immediately recognize the threat. He came to the door with a knife. Commands are shouted. Drop the weapon. Drop the weapon now. Marshall doesn't comply. Whether he's intending to attack officers, force them to shoot him in a suicide by cop scenario, or simply isn't processing the commands, the result is the same. 3 officers discharge their weapons nearly simultaneously. Marshall is struck multiple times. He falls. Officers immediately move in, kicking the knife away from his hand and beginning emergency medical treatment. Paramedics are called. CPR is administered. Everything possible is done to preserve his life, so he can be brought to trial, so Alexis's family can get answers, so justice can be served. But the damage is too extensive. Despite all life-saving efforts, Marshall Curtis Jones is pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation everyone has been working on for 4 months, the case that was finally building toward arrest and prosecution, dies with him. The following day, Paul Beard, chief of the Oakley Police Department, holds a press conference. The announcement is significant enough that local and national media are present. Chief Beard confirms that Alexis Gabe's case is now officially being treated as a homicide. He reveals that Marshall Curtis Jones had been charged with her murder, and he explains that Marshall was shot and killed by officers while resisting arrest in Kent, Washington. For Alexis's family, this is both confirmation of their worst fears and a devastating denial of justice. Their daughter was murdered, but her killer will never stand trial. They'll never hear him confess. They'll never look him in the eye in a courtroom. And perhaps most painfully, they still don't know where Alexis's body is. Marshall took that secret to his grave. Months pass. The investigation continues in Marshall's absence, now focused on determining if anyone else can be charged as accomplices. Prosecutors review all the evidence against Alicia Clark, Leslie the stepfather, and anyone else who may have helped Marshall evade justice or conceal evidence. But without Marshall's testimony, without his confession, without certain key pieces of evidence that died with him, building a prosecutable case against the others becomes extraordinarily difficult. Then, on November 3, 2022, a call comes into 911 that changes everything. A local resident is metal detecting near Jackson Road in Plymouth, California. It's a recreational hobby, searching for buried coins or lost jewelry in remote areas. But on this particular day, the metal detector leads him to something no one expects to find. What he discovers appears to be human remains. He immediately calls 911, marking the location and waiting for authorities to arrive. When officers and forensic investigators reach the scene in the Sierra foothills near Plymouth, they're confronted with a horrific discovery. Scattered across the mountainous terrain are the remains of a young woman. The body has been dismembered. Parts are separated and distributed across the area, likely moved by animal activity over the months since they were first placed there. The location is remote, exactly the kind of place someone would choose if they wanted to ensure remains would never be found. This is the Sierra foothills, the very area referenced in the opening moments of this case. Marshall had planned to dispose of Alexis's body in the remote mountains, and that's exactly what he did. A forensic odontologist is brought to the scene. Using dental records provided by Alexis's family, the specialist conducts a comparison with the remains. The identification is confirmed. These are the remains of Alexis Gabe. More than 9 months after she disappeared, more than 4 months after her killer was shot dead while resisting arrest, Alexis is finally found. The discovery of Alexis's remains brings her family a mixture of devastating grief and painful relief. For 9 months they've held on to hope, however faint, that somehow Alexis might still be alive. That hope is now extinguished. But at least they know. At least they can bring her home. At least they can lay her to rest. But knowing what happened to their daughter and getting justice for what was done to her are two entirely different things. Alexis's family immediately begins pressing law enforcement and prosecutors to file charges against the people who helped Marshall. The evidence seems overwhelming. The security footage shows Alicia loading bags containing what investigators believe were Alexis's remains. Alicia lied repeatedly to police about Marshall's whereabouts. She possessed his phone and had it wiped clean. She never showed remorse, never cooperated, never prioritized justice for Alexis over protecting her son. To Alexis's family, this is clear-cut criminal behavior that demands accountability. Leslie, the stepfather, also seems to have been dishonest. He claimed he didn't see Alexis the night she disappeared, contradicting Marshall's initial story. He restricted police access to the house during the early investigation. He stopped cooperating entirely once Marshall became the primary suspect. And what about other relatives who may have known what Marshall did, who may have helped him flee, who may have provided financial support or shelter during his 4 months on the run? Alexis's family wants answers. More than that, they want charges filed. They want trials. They want convictions. They want everyone who played a role in concealing Alexis's murder to face the same justice system Marshall evaded by getting himself killed. But the Contra Costa County District Attorney's Office determines there isn't sufficient evidence to file charges. Alicia Clark is temporarily detained for questioning. She's held while prosecutors review every piece of evidence, every statement, every action she took. But ultimately, she's released without charges. The same is true for Leslie and every other member of Marshall's family. The DA's position is that without Marshall's testimony, without his confession implicating his family, without physical evidence that definitively proves Alicia knew those bags contained human remains, the case doesn't meet the burden of proof required for criminal charges. Defense attorneys would argue that Alicia might have believed Marshall when he told her Alexis ran away. They'd argue the security footage is ambiguous about what's in those bags. They'd argue that possessing her son's phone isn't proof she tampered with evidence. They'd argue that a mother protecting her son from what she believes are false accusations isn't a crime. From a prosecutorial standpoint, these are significant hurdles. Prosecutors prefer cases where conviction is highly likely. Taking Alicia Clark to trial with the existing evidence would be a gamble, and losing that case would mean she could never be charged again due to double jeopardy protections. But to Alexis's family, this reasoning is unacceptable. They believe the evidence is sufficient. They believe the DA's office simply doesn't want to invest the resources in a difficult case. They believe the system is failing Alexis just as catastrophically as it failed to apprehend Marshall before he could flee. The Gabe family refuses to accept this outcome silently. They launch a multi-pronged advocacy campaign designed to pressure the DA's office, raise public awareness, and demand accountability. First, they create a petition criticizing the Contra Costa County District Attorney's Office for its handling of the case. The petition calls for charges to be filed against Alicia Clark and anyone else who assisted Marshall. It demands stronger legal protections for victims' families, ensuring their voices are heard in prosecutorial decisions. The petition circulates widely, gathering thousands of signatures from people outraged by the apparent injustice. Second, they engage with media relentlessly. They give interviews to local news stations, national crime programs, podcasts, and documentary producers. They ensure Alexis's story stays in the public consciousness. They make it impossible for the DA's office to quietly close the case and move on. Third, they hold memorials and vigils for Alexis, not just as mourning rituals, but as public demonstrations. These events draw community support, media coverage, and political attention. They keep pressure on decision-makers. Fourth, they connect with victims' rights organizations and advocacy groups specializing in domestic violence. They transform their personal tragedy into a broader push for systemic reform, arguing that cases like Alexis's reveal fundamental flaws in how the justice system handles family complicity in violent crimes. The Gabe family's advocacy is tireless, strategic, and deeply personal. Every interview, every petition signature, every memorial, it's all driven by a singular purpose: ensuring that what happened to Alexis matters, that her death results in change, that her memory translates into justice. But as of the present day, no charges have been filed against Alicia Clark. No charges have been filed against Leslie. No one besides Marshall, who is dead, has been held legally accountable for Alexis Gabe's murder or its cover-up. This reality haunts her family. They found Alexis. They buried Alexis. But they did not get justice for Alexis. The case raises profound questions about the limits of criminal prosecution. When is evidence sufficient? What standard of proof should apply when the primary suspect is deceased? How much should a prosecutor weigh the likelihood of conviction against the moral imperative to try? There are reasonable arguments on both sides. Prosecutors have a duty not to bring charges they can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Wrongful prosecutions are their own form of injustice. Resources are finite, and cases with higher likelihood of conviction may deserve priority. But families of victims would argue that difficult cases still deserve to be tried. That showing a willingness to prosecute accomplices sends an important message to other would-be collaborators in violent crimes. That some cases are worth fighting even when victory isn't guaranteed. The Alexis Gabe case also highlights the unique dangers of domestic violence. This wasn't a random attack. This wasn't stranger danger. This was someone Alexis knew intimately, someone she'd been in a relationship with for nearly 4 years, someone whose threats were known to her family but couldn't be prevented. The warning signs were there. Marshall had explicitly threatened to kill Alexis or himself if they broke up. Friends and family knew the relationship had become toxic. But there's no legal mechanism to protect someone from threats that haven't yet escalated to physical violence. Restraining orders require evidence. Arrests require probable cause of a crime already committed. By the time the system could intervene, Alexis was already dead. Domestic violence experts point to cases like this as examples of why threat assessment needs to be taken more seriously. When someone explicitly threatens murder in the context of a romantic relationship, that should trigger intervention, resources, and monitoring. Too often, such threats are dismissed as emotional exaggeration or empty words. Too often, they're not. The psychological profile of someone like Marshall is unfortunately common. Narcissistic tendencies that frame the partner as a possession rather than a person. Controlling behavior that escalates when control is threatened. An inability to accept rejection or abandonment. These traits cluster in a specific type of domestic abuser, one for whom the ultimate assertion of control is murder. If I can't have you, no one can, is not poetic language in these cases. It's a literal statement of intent. Alexis's decision to break up with Marshall was courageous. She knew he'd react badly. She knew there would be consequences. But she made the choice to reclaim her autonomy, to end a relationship that had become unhealthy, to move forward with her life. She never got that chance. Instead, Marshall made a final, irreversible decision. In the moments after Alexis told him it was over, whether through sudden rage or premeditated planning, he killed her. The exact circumstances of her death may never be fully known. Marshall never confessed to the method. The condition of the remains when discovered, after months of environmental exposure and animal activity, made determining precise cause of death difficult. What is known is that Marshall dismembered her body. This wasn't an accidental death he tried to cover up. This wasn't a moment of passion he immediately regretted. This was calculated brutality. Dismemberment requires time, tools, and a level of detachment from the humanity of the victim that most people cannot fathom. Where did Marshall do this? The evidence suggests it happened in his stepfather's house, likely in the bathroom, given the missing shower curtain and presence of blood traces and cleaning supplies. The attic, where the smell of decomposition was strongest and where K-9 units showed interest, may have been where he temporarily stored the remains while planning disposal. The black hair found in the attic likely belonged to Alexis. The blood traces found on walls likely came from the dismemberment process. The smell that multiple officers detected was probably residual odor that cleaning couldn't completely eliminate. When detectives first searched the house on January 28th, just 2 days after Alexis's murder, her body or body parts may have been in that attic. Officers walked beneath the very space where she was hidden. The K-9 units brought in on February 1st detected something, showing alert behaviors, but not definitively enough to pinpoint the location. By the time the full scope of the investigation became clear, by the time Marshall was definitively identified as the primary suspect, he'd already moved the remains. The security footage shows him and his mother loading those bags, almost certainly transporting Alexis's body to the vehicle that would carry her to the Sierra foothills. Did Alicia know what was in those bags? It's difficult to imagine she didn't. The weight, the size, the context of her son's girlfriend suddenly disappearing, the police investigation focusing on their home, all of it would make the contents obvious to anyone paying attention. But proving what Alicia knew versus what she suspected versus what she deliberately chose not to ask about, that's the challenge prosecutors face. Intent and knowledge are internal states, difficult to prove without confession or direct evidence like recorded conversations. The same ambiguity applies to Leslie. Did he genuinely not see Alexis the night she disappeared? Or was he lying to protect his stepson? If he was home, did he hear anything? See anything? Notice anything unusual? His refusal to confirm Marshall's story could mean he wasn't actually there, which means Marshall lied about having a witness. Or it could mean Leslie was there, knows something incriminating, and is protecting Marshall by claiming ignorance. These unanswered questions frustrate Alexis's family endlessly. They know Marshall killed their daughter. The evidence is overwhelming. Police know it. The DA knows it. But the people who helped Marshall, who lied for him, who concealed evidence, they walk free. This is the reality of justice in complex cases. Sometimes the law's requirements for evidence and proof create gaps where moral culpability exists, but legal accountability doesn't. Alexis's family continues their fight. They continue updating their petition, which has evolved from simply demanding charges to calling for broader reforms in how accomplices in violent crimes are prosecuted. They advocate for Alexis's law, proposed legislation that would make it easier to charge family members who provide material assistance to fugitives in violent crime cases. They speak at community events, sharing Alexis's story not just as a tragedy, but as a cautionary tale about the warning signs of dangerous relationships. They partner with domestic violence organizations to provide resources and education to young people about recognizing controlling behavior before it escalates. In doing this work, Alexis's family has transformed their grief into purpose. They cannot bring Alexis back. They cannot change what Marshall did. They cannot force the DA to file charges they've decided not to pursue. But they can ensure Alexis's death means something, that her story saves someone else, that her name becomes associated with change rather than just victimization. This is the long, difficult work of families who lose someone to violence. The immediate crisis of the disappearance and search is replaced by the marathon of seeking justice and preventing future tragedies. There's no endpoint where they can say the work is done. There's only the ongoing commitment to honor Alexis by fighting for others. The final resting place of Alexis Gabe, after her remains were recovered from the Sierra foothills, is now a place of peace. Her family holds memorials there. They visit. They leave flowers. They speak to her. It's a stark contrast to how she spent 9 months scattered across a remote mountainside, exactly as her killer intended, hidden and forgotten. But Alexis is not forgotten. Her family ensures that. The community ensures that. In cases like this, examined thoroughly, and presented truthfully, ensure that. The murder of Alexis Gabe is a case study in multiple systemic failures. It's a failure of threat assessment, where explicit threats of violence weren't enough to trigger protective intervention. It's a failure of early investigation, where crucial evidence in the house was missed during initial searches. It's a failure of family accountability, where people who clearly assisted a murderer faced no legal consequences. And it's a failure of closure, where the victim's family knows what happened but cannot achieve full justice. But it's also a story of resilience. Alexis's family refused to let her case go cold. They organized searches that found her car. They pressured police to maintain focus on Marshall. They provided crucial information that helped track him across state lines. They kept media attention on the case when it might have faded. And they continue advocating for changes that could prevent other families from enduring what they've endured. If this case teaches anything, it's that the people surrounding a violent offender have choices. Marshall's mother chose to help him. His stepfather chose not to cooperate. His sister chose to tell the truth. Those choices had consequences, both for the investigation and for their own moral standing. It also teaches that leaving a dangerous relationship is one of the most perilous moments in domestic violence situations. The point of separation, when the abuser realizes they're losing control, is when violence is most likely to escalate fatally. Alexis knew the risks. She ended the relationship anyway. She deserved support, protection, and the freedom to make that choice safely. She deserved to live. Instead, 24-year-old Alexis Gabe became another statistic in the epidemic of intimate partner violence. Her life was stolen by someone who claimed to love her but actually sought to possess her. Her death was concealed by family members who prioritized protecting a murderer over seeking justice for his victim. The questions that remain unanswered may never be resolved. Did Marshall plan Alexis's murder in advance? Or was it a spontaneous act of rage when she said it was over? How long did he keep her body in that house before moving it? Did his family actively help with disposal, or did they only help with the cover-up afterward? Could different investigative choices in those first critical days have led to Marshall's arrest before he could flee? These questions haunt everyone connected to the case. But they don't change the fundamental truth. Alexis Gabe was murdered, her body was dismembered and hidden, her killer evaded justice by dying before trial, and the people who helped him have never been charged. This is the reality her family lives with every day. This is why they continue fighting for accountability and reform. This is why Alexis's story matters. If you've watched this entire investigation, you understand the complexity of true crime cases, the gap between moral certainty and legal proof, and the ongoing pain of families seeking justice. This is what we do at the Dark Evidence Chronicles. We research meticulously, present facts responsibly, and honor victims by telling their stories with the depth and respect they deserve. Subscribe to this channel if you want more deep investigations into cases that reveal both the darkest aspects of human nature and the resilience of those seeking truth. Hit that like button if this story affected you. Share it if you believe Alexis's case deserves continued attention. And if you or someone you know is in a relationship where threats of violence have been made, please reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline provides confidential support 24 hours a day. Leaving is dangerous, but staying can be fatal. Make a plan. Seek help. Your life is worth fighting for. Alexis Gabe's life was worth fighting for. Her family knows that. Her community knows that. And now you know her story too. Thank you for watching the Dark Evidence Chronicles. We'll see you in the next investigation.